There are time codes below for anyone who doesn't want an education.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
You have committed crimes against Skyrim and her people. What say you in your defense?
I'm sorry, officer. I wanted to. Let me hit you with that high school bio textbook real quick, because it's about to get a little Frankenstein in here, a little sicko mode, if you will. Yes, yes. We've built our own camera lens from a whole ass camera. Real quick, I should have saved this episode for like another 4 months and made it a Halloween episode, but I just couldn't help myself. It seemed like so much fun. Dearly beloved, what you are gathered here today to witness is the reconstruction of the Kowa Optical Works Sakosha SLV shutter 65mm f 2.8 Promenar 127 medium format SLR lens into a micro four thirds lens, better known as FRANKENLENS. This is actually in fact version 3. What, you thought the lab in the LENSLAB name was just some little joke? No, I actually do that work here. The work of committing awful, horrible crimes against photography kind. Speaking of crimes against photography kind, in 1960, Kowa Optical Works released this, the Komaflex-S, featuring its 65mm f 2.8 Promenar, named such for its fluorite chemical admixture in its glass. This medium format film beast shot on 127 film, and whose dumb idea was it to make 127 format film? Oh, right. It's you. Yes, Kodak's back at it again with the bad ideas. 127 format film is a pretty much dead film format, although I've kind of noticed that most film formats don't die for long, that Kodak invented for its vest camera circa World War I, so that soldiers traveling the world could snap pics of their horrific war crimes and send them back home to their loving wives. Also, MLG Gamer pro tip here, if you decide for some ungodly reason that you want to shoot 127 format film, then you can just roll up some 35mm up into some vinyl canvas and call it a day. Like I used to do when I shot this camera. Yeah, that's me. Speaking of doing stuff, let's do some math. So, to calculate the focal distance of this lens, we're going to need to calculate the crop factor. To calculate the crop factor, we're going to need to determine the hypotenuse of our sensor. Because we're calculating 2 micro four thirds from 4x4 medium format 127, we're going to need to change the equation. First, let's calculate the hypotenuse of the intended sensor size, which is 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters. When we plug that in, we get a hypotenuse of 56.57. Now, let's calculate the hypotenuse of our micro four thirds sensor. That's going to be 17.3 by 13. When we plug that in, we get a hypotenuse of 21.64. Now, to determine the crop factor, we need to divide the hypotenuse of the intended sensor by the hypotenuse of the micro four thirds sensor. This gives us a solution of 2.6, or a crop factor of 2.6. Now, we multiply that by the original focal distance, which is 65mm, and we get a result of 169.9 millimeters, or 170 millimeters. And that is our new focal distance. However, if you look at the lens, you can tell that this is probably also bullshit. and probably doesn't make sense. I mean, the thing probably doesn't infinity focus. We'll have to test it and see. Speaking of test, this thing was starting to test my patience during the build, especially this piece of shit right here. As an aside, during the build I found out that this thing originally came with a bunch of really cool accessories, including 2 auxiliary lenses custom built in Prominar glass. Man, I'd really like to get my hands on those. I wonder how much they're going for. Oh, I can't seem to find them by themselves. That's kind of strange. Well, I wonder how much the full kit is going for. And behold the weight of my sin. I suppose I should start going back to church now. Wait, I can explain. The unit I had was broken and couldn't be repaired, and I didn't want it to be just a shelf piece, so oh god, this doesn't make it any better. On to the test. Right after these commercial messages.
I'm Freddy Krueger, and you're invited to my special get-together. But beware, you may never leave. Dial this number now. I've got some grisly details for you. And if you're one of my lucky callers selected at random, you'll talk to me live while you're awake and safe. So dial this number now if you dare. Talk to me live. Freddy Krueger is waiting just for you.
$2 for the first minute, 35 cents each additional minute.
A man-made horror beyond your comprehension. This FRANKENLENS. This is a Kowa Optical Works 65mm f2.8 Prominar from a Komaflex-S built down to work on a micro 4/3 camera. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to disassemble this lens and then reassemble it for you. So first, we have an MD to micro 4/3 adapter. Then we have a M42 T2 to Minolta MD adapter. In here, it's the standard assembly with the ring, the M42 mount ring held into place with 3 grub screws. However, as you can see, what I've done is I took this out, and then on the inside, I put a C-mount to M42 on backwards so that the flange locks it in place as long as this ring is held in with the grub screws. Then I have a rubber stopper that I cut down to size and shape so that this can screw directly onto that mount without any of these control rings on the outside here being stopped by friction forces from any of the adapters. And then here I have a tiny piece of brass that I cut down to fit perfectly into this groove here. Now, on the... we'll just put you there. On the original assemblage of the lens, you have this outer ring here on top that connects with this notch here, and this is the aperture control notch. Well, all of these controls in the lens, the shutter controls, the shutter speed controls, the shutter mode controls, the aperture controls, are all meant to synchronize back up with the body of the camera, and then the body of the camera is supposed to do an aperture lock or aperture compensation with this notch here. But without the body of the camera for it to interact with, this is actually a liability, because as you can see, if I just move this notch, it changes the aperture on the inside of the glass. So I cut this piece of brass to fit perfectly into this little groove and hold that notch into place. And when this rubber stopper is right on top of there, it doesn't come out. And so I can freely adjust the aperture without worrying about it drifting. Now, as for the lens itself, everything is fully functional. The shutter cocks and fires. Here, let me demonstrate that for you real quick. So here's the cocking notch. We just push that over. Oh. Here's the cocking notch. It locks into place, and then right underneath of it is another notch that opens the shutter itself. And now it doesn't want to work. Why don't you want to work? And with that open, we can see through the glass. And you can see the aperture here. If I just stop it down. Oh. See, and that's why you have to have that brass retainer in there. Okay. Where's that? Oh. So, you can adjust this. That like that, we should be able to... There it goes. So like I said, everything is self-contained and fully functional. The next step for this lens is to get some sort of ring over this housing to protect all the individual controls, and on that ring have knobs and switches to interact with each of the individual mechanisms, such as the shutter open, the shutter cocking, and the shutter release, which is this. I'll flip that real quick for you. And now it doesn't want to release. Why doesn't it want to release? Oh, it's on a timer. That's why it doesn't want to release. There it goes. So like I said, everything's fully functioning. It's just a matter of prettying it up. Now, it occurs to me that because this is C-mount here, This could be attached to the front of a bellows and be shot more effectively that way. Another thing to note here is that during disassembly, the retaining screw for this entire front optic, which was right here, came loose. And so now the entire front optic can be adjusted past what should be infinity focus and past what should be minimum focus for the lens. Despite all this, it works just fine. It focuses to infinity, it focuses to its minimum, or what its perceived minimum would be, and I've got no complaints. The quality of the images is great. I only find that this lens can be a real pain to work with sometimes. But the future of this lens is set in stone. I'm going to be working to get better parts made for it. And then then it'll be really a full-fledged lens once I can get into CAD and slice up some new parts for it and print those parts. Well, I think it's time for an adventure. Let's go to Times Square.
Rats.
Goblins, werewolves, vampires. They're not real, but he is a real nightmare. Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance. It's the night he came home. Halloween 2, Thursday at 8 on Channel 17. Parental discretion advised.
It was a beautiful evening in downtown Manhattan, down by Times Square, and my first stop was the Monument to the Garment Workers. It's a lovely statue of a needle threading a button, and I was shocked at the results I got with immediately. This lens seemed to soak up light like a sponge, and I suppose that only makes sense because it's intended for medium format. But I have to think that something in the fluorite of the glass made it work particularly well last night. Next stop, we made our way to the Krispy Kreme, where the donuts weren't the only thing hot and glazed last night. My girlfriend got me a lemon custard-filled donut, and it was quite delicious, with a chalky milk. Of note here is how well the lens worked with the neon of the Krispy Kreme sign. It just seemed to radiate light in this glorious halo of capitalism and gluttony. Honestly, I'm tempted to try and work it into a mock-up of an advertisement, the way the neon seems to sear into the image. Now we have an image of some skyscrapers as seen from 34th Street, and I have to say, the rendering on the reds and blues with the colors is very, very nice. But the way it all comes together gives the image almost a Blade Runner feel. Notice the flaring on the lamp post there. The really intense flaring and vibrancy of harsh light sources with this lens is impeccable. If you are of the J.J. Abrams mindset when it comes to your choice in lenses, then something like this might be for you. And the fact that Kowa Optical Works continues to make lenses with the same formulation of glass means that you can get a prestige lens from them now for about $600, $700 with the same kind of effects, and they're making even better lenses than the 65mm f2.8 medium format Prominar now. Pretty impressive if you ask me. This next image invokes the aesthetics of Akira, with two large buildings right on top of each other back to back with their various light sources on and off. What I will say is that focusing with this lens is an incredible pain and a careful balancing act between several factors. Even shutter speed seems to come into play, which is probably in line with how the lens is originally intended to be used. The internal mechanics of the lens take everything into consideration and compensate everything against each other. The aperture, the shutter speed, the shutter mode. It's a lot. I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner photographer, and moreover, I don't think many people would recommend modifying or building your own camera equipment at all. After we got done on 34th Street, we made our way to the Diamond District, which was all shut down already. This final image, a neon sign of a heart-shaped diamond, rather matches the coloration and effect of the Krispy Kreme logo image, though I have to say, the way the neon turned out in this image is very intense. It no longer looks like a neon light, and rather looks like searing hot iron. This lens really loved being used at night with harsh light sources. And my next test, when I do a follow-up on this video, will be during the day, so that the images can be compared. But I will say this as my final thoughts. This lens was incredibly hard to work with, and even harder to compose with. Most of these shots had to be taken off of a tripod, and even then, many more shots that I took were not in perfect focus, or were blurry, or not great. It does focus to infinity, somehow, but it's incredibly sensitive to every factor under the sun, to the point where I was even concerned about light pollution, something that doesn't cross most photographers' minds. Well, that's all for today, folks, and remember, art is gay.